Welcome to Advanced UI Patterns. In this session, we're going to look at some of the advanced UI patterns that are a little bit beyond the basic widgets that we've been working with so far. And those will include the OutSystems UI, which has its own set of UI patterns, which are slightly more advanced types of widgets. And then we'll talk about rich widgets. And two rich widgets that we'll talk about specifically are the list navigation and the list sort column. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we're talking about advanced UI patterns, we are talking about things that go beyond the basic widgets that we've worked with. OutSystems UI is actually a UI framework for web and mobile apps. And that UI framework inside of OutSystems comes with over 100 UI patterns and template screens that we can use to start with. There's another set of UI patterns that are more advanced that we just mentioned called the rich widgets. And these are groups of widgets that include parts of the themes and some actions that will actually give groups of widgets better behavior and more interesting capabilities. So there are still the basic widgets, and they will always be available inside of the toolbar inside of Surface Studio. But in this session, we're really trying to focus on some of the advanced UI patterns. And some of those advanced UI patterns will be things like the things we're seeing to the right. Things like setting up tabs inside of a page, being able to use a gallery, or create an accordion or a separator component on a screen. So all of these are different UI patterns that will be available, and some of these patterns that we're seeing here, like the list sort column, are actually a rich widget. So we're going to describe the two of these in a bit more detail. Now if we start with OutSystems UI, OutSystems UI is that UI pattern framework that allows us to go ahead and create nicer looking user interfaces quickly and easily. To learn more about OutSystems UI, if you go to www.outsystems.com and then /outsystems-UI, you'll be able to see examples and more information about the whole OutSystems UI framework. And the OutSystems UI framework is this pre-built set of UI patterns that can be easily placed inside of screens. And we'll basically do that by using the normal drag and drop. The pre-built UI patterns will be available inside of the toolbar, and then we'll be able to drag those and drop them where we need them. Inside of the OutSystems UI website, you can see that there are UI patterns that are described, and then the screen templates that are described. And we can go back and forth between seeing which are available for the web and which are available for mobile apps. And at any given time, if we're looking for a particular pattern, there's a nice search that will get us to that pattern a little bit faster. Now the reason the search and some of this categorization is important is because there are a lot of these UI patterns. So they've been broken into a number of different categories, and you could go ahead and select a category and then see the types of patterns that are available. So here we're seeing that inside of the content patterns, the one I mentioned earlier, the accordion pattern, the card section patterns. So there are a lot of interesting patterns that will help us display content. There will also be different patterns that will help us control the overall layout of the screen, to help navigation, to help be more responsive. So there are a lot of different patterns that can be used. Now, not only can you see examples of these patterns at the website, but you can also go to the documentation. So inside of OutSystems documentation, all of these patterns are actually documented so that we understand how to use them better and when the best time to use them might be. So a lot of information revolving around these different patterns and how we can use them. We're not going to go into any detail on any of the specific UI patterns because there are over 100 of them, and given all of those patterns, it would be difficult to go through the details of each one. So as you need to use any one of these patterns, you can look up the information on the OutSystems UI website. You can then also consult the documentation, and that way you'll be able to figure out what the best way to use the pattern that you're looking for would be. Now that takes us to the rich widgets. So the rich widgets are also an advanced UI pattern, and these are additional widgets for common functionality that we might expect inside of web applications. And these are a set of widgets that have existed inside of OutSystems for some time. And some of the examples of these rich widget patterns are things like the drop-down menu, the list navigation, the list sort column. So here we're looking at a table records in the screenshot, and we can see that the list sort column is being used to let us sort the column. And then down below, the list navigation is being used to go ahead and move through different records in the table so that we can navigate through maybe what might be a very large result set. So if this table holds hundreds of results, we may only want to see them 10 at a time, and to be able to navigate through that using the navigation component at the bottom can be a very nice way to display that to users. Now, rich widgets come inside of their own module, and inside of that module, the rich widgets are in their own UI flow. And then inside that UI flow, all of the rich widgets are defined. And again, we see the drop-down menus, icons, counters. We're going to look specifically at the navigation and the sort column because these two will be used quite often, and when we set up our own tables, we may wish to be able to control these specifically. We're going to go ahead and talk about how to do that. So let's start with the list navigation. This is the navigator for a set of table records that might have multiple pages of results. So it will show a defined number of elements in the page, and then it'll allow us to navigate through that. So if we had a table record that was going to show a certain set of information, and we wanted to add navigation to it, we could do that by simply going up to the search bar and searching for navigation, and inside the user interface, it will list the list navigation rich widget. And we can go ahead and drag and drop that rich widget right from the search result down to the bottom of our table record. And by dragging it to the bottom of our table record, it will place a navigation component at the bottom. That navigation component has quite a few properties. And some of the important properties are the list widget ID, so we know which table to associate this navigator with. We need a line count, which would be the number of records that are allowed to be displayed inside that table at once. The total row count, so that when we look inside the database for all of the different records of this particular type, we need to know what the total number of those are. And then last but not least, onNotify is also important. This will be the action that we're going to use when someone tries to navigate. We're going to have to go ahead and update what's going to be displayed. And to be able to do that, we would have to refresh the data coming from the database, and then also make sure that the different widgets, the table record itself, and the navigator get updated. So if we look at these inside of the property area, when we create something like the employee list navigator for an employee table record, it needs to know which widget we're actually connecting to. So the employee table has an identifier, and we would tell it to go ahead and use that identifier because this navigator is going to be associated with that table. That table will have a line count. So that table will say maybe it will display up to 10 records. So when it displays those 10, once it displays more than 10, the navigator will begin showing the different options beyond the first page, the first set of 10 results. And then we also need to know the total row count. So if there was a get employees aggregate that was getting all of the information for this table, then knowing what the count that was coming back from that aggregate, that would tell us the total number of employees that are available in the database that could be displayed inside of this table. And we can even control something like the maximum number of page numbers to display. But the next important piece is onNotify. And that is, here we're going to pick an action that when someone selects something in the navigator, this is what's going to go ahead and be able to help us update what's being displayed. And here, refresh table would go up and call or refresh the get employee aggregate, and then from there do an AJAX refresh of the employee table itself so it displays the correct records, and then update the list navigation so that if we were looking at page 12 and we went backwards, maybe we'd now be on page 11. So both of the pieces, both of the components to the visual representation of the table need to be updated at the same time. And you can tell here, because of the way we're showing the action and how we're describing everything here, that this widget is AJAX enabled. So by default, when you're using this widget, it's going to make these requests and responses asynchronously. So it's going to be using AJAX, and it's only going to update the part of the page that will be displaying this information. So we can also then modify the actual table record itself. Table records have something called a start index, and we can have that interact with the navigation so that it only shows the things that it should be showing inside the table. So this is basically saying that the table will be influenced by when someone clicks on the navigator. And there is a special function that we can use to do that. And that's called the list navigation get start index. And then we have to tell it the table record that's actually doing the work. So if we look down here, we can see that start index exists right below the line count. So here we're defining our table record. We know where we're getting our data from, and we're going to show 10 of the results per page. But the start index for what the first one is going to be will depend on the navigator. So if someone clicks on the navigator, what the first one in the start index will be is going to be dynamic. So it's going to make sure that it works with the list navigator for this table, because there is a possibility that we have more than one table on a particular screen. So it does need to know that this table is associated to this navigation piece, and by linking those two things, we're always going to get the right information back. So this lets us navigate through tables a little bit easier and show people exactly what they're looking for more quickly when we have really large result sets. Now, there's also the list sort column widget, and this is going to help us dynamically sort the table records. So we can pick a particular column and say that we'd like to sort the results that are going to be in the table. So if we drag and drop the list sort column widget, so here if we searched for it by typing in sort, the results that would come back, we could drag and drop the list sort column widget right next to the column that we'd like to go ahead and sort. So here we'll sort the contact column, and by dragging and dropping the widget there, we could then go set the properties for that. And this means that we have to set the column of the database table, the column of information that we're actually going to be sorting. And then if someone clicks on that icon, if someone clicks on the request to do a sort, we have to go ahead and trigger an action to go ahead and refresh the data again, very similar to what we did in the navigation. So here, in defining our list sort column widget, we'd want to go ahead and define the column of the entity. So in this particular case, we're in our employee table record. So the employee entity with the contact attribute, or as we know it, the underlying employee table with the contact column, that will go ahead and be the column that we're going to sort as far as the data is concerned. And the way that sort is done is by, when someone clicks on it, we'll notify the refresh table action. We'll go get another set of data from the aggregate, and then we'll actually do an AJAX refresh on the table records. So again, this particular rich widget is AJAX enabled. Now, to be able to do this, we sort of need some cooperation from the aggregate. So the list sort column has an input variable in the aggregate, and that's going to help us do this dynamic sorting. So if we look down here in the aggregate editor, there is a function that helps us retrieve the column that we're going to be sorting. And that's actually stored in a session variable. So here we see our get employees aggregate, and the get employees aggregate has a special sort. And instead of us just picking one of the columns to sort, you can see that we have an input variable and that it's set to this function. And the function is the function that comes from our sort column widget. It's going to order things by, and it's saying it has to order things by and for the employee table, and that the default column will be the employee's name. So that name column will be the default. But when someone clicks on one of the widgets, the icons that are doing the sort, then this will actually refresh this, which we talked about in the action, and once it's being refreshed, the session will know which of the columns we clicked on. So this is the default, but when it actually comes in here, it will change the sort when it reruns the aggregate. And because we were looking at in our example the contact column, instead of sorting by name, it will now sort by contact information. So we covered a lot of things. We started by talking about OutSystems UI and the different UI patterns that are available, and that you can use the website and the documentation to learn more and use some of the really cool UI patterns that have been built to make things faster for us. And there are also some rich widgets that are really important when we're working with table records. We want to be able to do navigation and we want to be able to do sorting. So we've explained those in a little more detail. So that's it for Advanced UI Patterns. Thanks for listening.